And welcome to Here's the Thing, one more program, our weekly program where we discuss subjects that are interesting to our community. And, hopefully you keep watching us because that's why we keep producing these programs. This week, again, we have some interesting guests. This week it's guests, not just one guest. Who are going to discuss various topics of interest to the community and to themselves, and in some ways to the programming at Camões TV. So we will be discussing some of that. We're always trying to improve and innovate the things that we do here for you. So hopefully you'll enjoy our talk today, and I'm going to introduce you to our two special guests. The first one, of course, is known to everyone because he's an associate here, and he writes for Millennium Stadium, and so you know him as Vincent Black. But to me, he's more like Vincent Nigro. Welcome, Mr. Nigro.
Thanks for being here, Manny. So you totally exposed my cover.
In the end, I don't think any of us have a cover.
Ever covered? No one probably ever believed it anyways.
That's right. But, your best side is the one that's shown on the photo of Vincent Black. So, it doesn't really make that much difference.
It gives me a little bit of an opportunity every once in a while to go a little bit offside with that column. But I've really enjoyed writing the weekly columns there, and stay tuned, there's even more to come.
Most people don't understand that writing kind of frees our spirits and our minds, where the words that come out really are an indication of how we feel and how we project life. Right?
You know how I anticipate that, Manny, is I try to write what most people are thinking, and sometimes they're afraid to say it. So I try to engage that conversation.
If I wrote everything I thought, I'd be arrested. Our second special guest, you haven't seen him for a while probably, but he is always around. This man is a community leader, and he'll always be. And so we thought that he should be reintroduced at least to our Lusophone community, because he's going to be around more and more. Mr. Giorgio Mammoliti, welcome.
It's very nice to be here again. Thank you very much. I'm like that cat, you walk into a room, you can't see him right away. But
well, I hear that you've been hiding amidst the trees somewhere near 𝗬𝗺𝗀𝗀𝗀 Beach or something like that. Is that a fact?
Well, what happened was after last election, I decided to just kind of take a bit of a hiatus. I was working though, I was still working, but, just kind of relax a little bit. I've always had a house up in 𝗬𝗺𝗀𝗀𝗀 Beach, so I decided that that was where I was going to hang my hat for a few months. And then COVID hit. So what better place to be than kind of away from the city during this turmoil. So that's where I've been, yeah. And I've been working, as I've said. So I've been doing a little bit here and there.
So as a former counselor for 30 somewhat years, there's so many, I even forgot the exact number. The political side has never left your blood. It's still boiling in there, and you still feel that in a way, even in absentia, you're still governing the city of Toronto, at least from afar, and seeing what's going on with the city. Since the election, what's bothered you the most about how this city is being run?
Oh gosh, what a question. Look, you do sit back. I tried to stay away for as long as I could, stayed away from the media. It was almost like I was on this high after 30 years, and I needed to come down in a hurry. So it hurt for a little while. But now getting back into the swing of things and hearing what might be going on, Manny, I've got to tell you that I'm not liking how the city of Toronto is looking, how it's feeling, And
I find it kind of dirty and
where the soul's
just
going
messy.
through it, it's almost gone. And COVID is almost like throwing the last nail into the coffin of it. It's this feeling that you get in Toronto. It doesn't make you feel vibrant anymore. And
cold.
people have taken over the streets, our sidewalks, and so I'd love to dive into that myself a little further. I'm not liking what I'm seeing.
You mentioned that losing the last election hurt a little bit. You're a man who hadn't lost an election in over 30 years. What does it take to recover from a loss of that nature? How do you regroup, and how does your mind reconstruct itself to say, this was a loss, maybe it was just a short lesson, that I'm not invincible, but I can come back and reconstruct myself. How does it really feel, Giorgio, to reconstruct yourself this way?
Wow, these questions you're asking are very good. And I have to tell you that there was a point after the election that I thought, well, this is really it. I mean, after 30 years, you're doing well in the private sector too, which I'm still doing. But there's a part of you that needs to reckon with your life and where it's gone. And you do think about the times where you may have made some mistakes, where you really thrived, and where you've made a difference for people in your constituency. I've made a lot of mistakes, I must tell you, but I have made mistakes. And you really try to focus on those mistakes. And then once you kind of figure out where you've gone wrong, then what I've done is I've tried to figure out whether I want politics in my life again or not, and try and adjust those so that I don't make the same mistakes over again. So it really is a mental kind of adjustment that you've got to bring onto yourself, and you got to recognize who you are inside and who you want to be in the future, right? I mean, I'm getting older, so.
Well, sometimes age brings a little bit of, brings the best in us, because we see the world in a little, differently as we get older. And I think, so I don't think it's all a bad thing. But Vince, you've been in politics, for many, many years. You've been a friend with Giorgio for many years. You've observed them politically over the years, the ups and downs, and you and I many times spoke about, some of the things that Giorgio would say.
Right.
Looking back and looking forward, if Giorgio decides to run again, what do you think he may be looking at politically, how we should look at it differently?
Well, as you said, I've known George for a long time, and we've been friends for a long time. And I've always told George what I thought, good, bad, or indifferent. And one thing I found about George is, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the future projects, is that he was someone that always was there. Because as you know, in the bad times, or when something goes a little bit sideways, people abandon you, and you really have no sense. What I found about George is that over the years, Manny, he's touched every aspect of politics. He's been an NDPer. He's been a conservative. He's been a liberal. He's been in the legislature. He's been at...
Maybe he doesn't know who he is.
I'm trying to answer your question. He has, like many politicians can't say that he has the diverse background. He actually was a parliamentary assistant, which was an interesting portfolio. He headed up a lot of the City of Toronto housing components that we had here. He's toyed with the Ford government running provincially for the Conservatives. So, the Mel Lastman mega city from the old North York days to Toronto. So, he's touched every aspect of politics across the board in all three facets of the politics. And I can actually say, man, he's one guy that, yes, he's opinionated, and he's done some stuff which you and I have scratched our heads, And I brought up the other day when he took off his shirt at city council, which was a big thing. But when you reflect back on it, he was trying to get attention to that issue. Now, has he learned and is he seasoned in terms of how he's going to approach certain things? Some days that I'm not so sure he's changed at all. But I think he's gotten a lot more wisdom. He's got a lot more wisdom.
Let me ask you both a question, because while I agree with some of the sentiment that's brought forward, most of it actually, Vince, I'd ask you this question: what do politicians, or what are politicians expected to do in their career? And mine lasted 30 years. Personally, I think you have to adjust to the environment around you, and your constituents are your environment. So their opinions matter. So it depends on where they go. Sometimes they're left of the spectrum, sometimes they're right of the spectrum, sometimes they're in the middle, and they expect their politicians to do exactly what they want.
And demographics change so in any area, so you also have to adjust.
You have to adjust to all of it. So while I'm being criticized for being all over the map, so to speak, being all over the map really means experience. It means doing what your community wants you to do. So yeah, I started out as a 28-year-old NDPer, not knowing that I really didn't belong to that party. I don't. I'm more of a conservative. I think most people know that. But you start toying and playing with where you are on the spectrum because your community is very demanding, and that's what they want you to do.
Yeah, in the end, you're trying to satisfy your constituents, and that's the bottom line. At the same time, you have to work within a city council that, for the most part, has been left-leaning, and when you're on the right side of the spectrum, fighting the forces that control the city, for the most part, it must be a very frustrating experience.
Let me tell you, Manny, I think my soul is conservative. I feel conservative. I always have, no matter where I've been on the spectrum. However, I think I'm more left-leaning in some issues than even the furthest left socialists might be. I think, and I've proven myself by writing policies. The first 10-year affordable housing policy in North America was written by me. I believe that people need to be taken care of if they're out of home. I believe that there are other ways to deal with homelessness that we're afraid to touch on. And I don't believe in profit and poverty. And that's what's going on in the city of Toronto right now. People are making profits on the backs of the poor. We're not really helping the poor. We're keeping them down.
But how do we keep an economy strong? If we look at, as you suggest, making a profit on the backs of the poor, societies generally work by people making a profit so that they can support social causes and social policies. So if the people who are making money and making a profit, if everyone decided not to anymore, then what would happen to the world? I mean, the profit and loss issue has to be looked at, and unfortunately, a lot of left-leaning politicians look at profit as a dirty word. Those who take the risks, and I'm not suggesting that society per se creates the poor people on its own. I think there's many circumstances that create circumstances to be poor. So look at the profits on the back of the poor, and when you look at the city today, with our parks being covered with tents, and you having been an advocate for the poor and have written policy for the poor, and looking at all the social housing that supposedly supposed to be building and still not built. Even with, if we had constructed the thousands of units that are needed, do you think that it would remove all the tents that we see today, or would they still be there regardless?
So I think what you're starting to see in the city of Toronto are just mere symptoms to a much larger problem. I think we all kind of agree to that. It's almost like your body getting a virus or an ailment and you ignoring it completely. you're going to end up suffering in other ways. It could attack other organs. It could, at the end of the day, mean the livelihood of your body, right? And so what you're seeing is the symptoms that are associated to a much larger problem. We don't necessarily have to build bricks and mortar to deal with our situation of the lack of affordable housing, for instance. You've got landlords out there that have empty units. There should be a mechanism in place to give them a bit of subsidy to house these people instead of being forced onto the streets. And then there's, a larger problem as well, in that you've got addiction now that becomes associated to those that are on our streets. And the government's role in trying to alleviate that is going in the wrong direction, in my opinion. And by the way, I wrote the policy on how to treat addicts as well in 1993, provincially. So I don't like the direction we're going in. We're basically saying to those that need help around that they're just addicts. The government's basically saying, you're addicts, you're going to stay addicts, so let's just watch you take drugs. And they say it's in a safe manner, instead of finding relief for them and trying to get them off of the substance. So we're taking a completely different direction. We've got a problem with poverty getting worse, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and instead of them being indoors in a place where they're safe, a lot of them are now outdoors. Even the addicts are outdoors, and they're taking drugs on our sidewalks.
But I agree with you that these are problems. They're a symptom of a much higher problem that exists in society. There's no question about it. I'm just wondering, looking at the numbers increasing in our parks, Vince, and all the tents, and nobody doing really anything about it, and governments, because of the social stigma attached to dealing with the problem in removing people from parks and so on, because nobody wants to get their hands dirty, because socially, social media will eat them alive. And so they're allowing, the police are not enforcing the laws, and the governments are allowing them to stay, like they did in California, and they have taken over entire neighborhoods, terrorizing some of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. If the hands-off approach continues in this city, this is the way that we're going to go. So regardless of what we think, can we abandon our parks and under the underpasses and so on, and allow all of these mini encampments to rise? What's the solution if nobody wants to touch it?
I to an extent, I agree with George that there is more issues at hand with the people that are out there. But where the real problem is the leadership of the city, the province, and even the country. And the bureaucrats right now are running the city, the province, and the country. It's not the politicians. They're going with the flow. A lot of these bureaucrats are letting the legislation ride where the police their hands are tied. They want to see more stuff happen like that. They haven't come up with any solutions. The system, the way it's set up, needs some clear direction on moving forward, because this problem, if we don't deal with it, and it's been the winter, as the summer gets on there and we get more and more people, you're going to start seeing confrontations with the underpasses and people in the parks. So the leadership of this city has got to step up and work with the bureaucrats, because I believe that's where the issues are.
Well, I'm hoping that some solutions are found, whether it's housing them or not, even though I don't think a lot of them want to be housed. They want to be where they're at, because the mental health issue hasn't been dealt with. And as you know, Camões releases people with mental health issues, and it's totally acceptable. So, once you have these people roaming the streets, it's hard to get them into a situation in housing.
Social housing isn't the solution. for those that are mentally ill and addicted to drugs and want to be on the streets. And 90% of the people that are on the streets fit that category. The real solution is transitional housing, and we refuse to build it because it's expensive. But if you really want to help your homeless and those that are addicted perhaps to have substance abuse, you want to build more transitional housing, which means there's more people there waiting for them to help them assess them, help them grow after they're assessed, find a job, and then kind of bring them back gradually into society. It works if it's done properly. We do have one or two of those kinds of forms of housing, and I think that that's the relief that we need if you want to see a big difference. And I know I'm taking up some time here, but most people don't understand why there's drugs being taken on our sidewalks and our parks, and why people are living like that right now. I'll tell you why, Manny. Our Prime Minister passed a new resolution, a new law that basically said that any municipality that accepts what they call safe injection sites will now report to another law, which has the police department saying hands off. So in other words, they're not going to enforce anything that goes on around a safe injection site. So the police are told, leave them alone, and you can't touch them if it's related to a drug offense, a minor drug offense. And really the only thing they're enforcing are things like murder and physical assaults and that sort of thing. So you're starting to see people kind of filtering out onto the streets, knowing that the police aren't going to touch them. Wrong approach.
Wrong approach. Well, we're covering this issue on this week's Millennial Stadium, the newspaper, as to the reasons, the proliferation of the tents and tent cities all over the parks, and what are the social causes behind it. Hopefully, in talking to the various agencies, and we will, have a better idea of
Don't talk
what's
to the
causing.
agencies. The agencies are getting paid.
They're getting paid.
So there's where your profit comes in on the back of the poor. Talk to the neighbors. Talk to the people that have to live beside this, and talk about their experiences with what happens when all of that filters out into their neighborhoods. We're talking to way too many people that are making salaries off of the poor. Of course, they're going to suggest that we keep doing what we're doing because they're getting a nice, beautiful paycheck at the end of the month.
Of course, and all these agencies exist, and they're all well paid, and so it's self-serving to keep this problem alive. So we'll be covering that. Vince, one other reason that we're talking today, and here's the thing, is because we are contemplating a new show, perhaps looking at the future on what the world is going to be like, and I think it's pundits are always guessing what things should be and they should not be, and I guess we're going to create something that may look at the world from that perspective. So it's going to be called The War Room, and so just what's the concept behind it?
Well, thank you very much for bringing that up. We've in the last several months, as you know, thinking about different types of shows and whatever else, and we decided to put together a show called The War Room. And The War Room, as opposed to just talking about the news and saying you can get your shot here, or there's a problem here, or there's a tent city here, as The War Room says, you anticipate what's going to happen. You kind of suggest how you're going to tackle a problem, how you're going to tackle a war. So The War Room will be talking about issues, not only locally, but internationally and globally, with a different perspective, a different spin on it. And Giorgio Mammoliti has graciously agreed to co-host it with me. We'll have you on the show as well on certain topics that you would like to give us not only your opinion, but your perspective on how to deal with future problems. Just as we've talked about here today, right? It's easy to just comment about the reality of what the issue is, but it's another thing to actually talk about how we can tackle it. And then you ask yourself the question is, why Vince Nigro, Manuel Da Costa, Giorgio Mammoliti? Why are you guys experts in this? Well, you know, and thinking about it, and George and I talked about it, is that between the two of us, and even yourself, we've got over 30, 35 years of experience in all aspects. We've sat in briefings with ministers, prime ministers. We've tackled on the planning issues, the drug issues that George has been on a lot of the task forces, the housing issues. So we think we can bring a nicer, maverick kind of edge to an issue. That's kind of, and the show always evolves, but the War Room will be about anticipating issues and describing what we think should happen.
So when is the first show that?
We're next week. There'll be some spots in terms of, but 2 weeks. 2 weeks this week, the first show will be airing.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm looking forward to it because I think it challenges our view and perspective of the world from the point of view of what may be or what should be, not necessarily what is. And it's not a simple process to get our mind working around that because we're used to being fed
News.
the news and
Propaganda.
information, propaganda, and now we're trying to look at signs from out there to kind of get a perspective what might happen. That will challenge our minds a little bit, George.
Oh my gosh. I have to say to you that, you know, what excites me about what we're about to venture into is that we could do this a little differently than most are trying to do this. Most are coming from the angle of you know, the social arguments and what's best based on what others might be saying in a much larger populated kind of way. I see this as an opportunity to think like a family might be thinking around their dinner table. And what are the issues that are affecting them based on government's decisions? Like why, for instance, we touched on this earlier, why are there people sleeping in parks? They have no idea in their, you're around that dinner table that it's actually government that is stopping the enforcement. Because of the safe injection sites in the community. Why don't we build more affordable housing and social housing? It's because of planning issues. It's because it costs way too much for the land, and there's no way you can build something affordable that will get a developer interested in coming forward. So there's no real relief for developers. These are the kinds of issues that I think affect every single family. And if you look at it in their perspective and then report it out as though it's your mother or your father or your sibling kind of reporting out what they think, I think this might have some legs to this. I think people might want to hear a little bit more of what we have to say.
Yeah, we're you know, the people that watch a lot of the platforms on the MDC platforms, whatever, they're educated people, but we want to inform further different perspective so that you actually
Make them think.
Yeah. As opposed to having the same news shot at them. You can get your advisor here, you can get your AstraZeneca here. Just take a different, and we're going to try to expand because we have a global audience. You know, we're going to look at stuff that's happening south of the border with the migration. Could it happen up here? Like there's already some signs because, you know, a lot of the stuff that happens in Canada, we're just followers. There's a lot of these issues that right now people aren't thinking about, but we wanted to start thinking about, and then ultimately it affects us.
Yeah, it is a tragedy of what's happening in the Mexico-U.S. border with children, and it's some of the topics that you know, the War Room might tackle. This show is about to end, and it goes quickly. And with two special guests like yourselves, you know, there's always a lot to say. But people should tune in to the War Room show and get some more of this type of perspective. And I want to thank Giorgio Mammoliti and Vince Nigro for being with us today. And see you next time. Thank you. you.